afternoon. Mr. Williams, will you introduce yourself? Tell us your name and your DOC number, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon. My name is Lester Williams. My DOC number is 493591.
Yes, sir. And counsel, would you introduce yourself, please?
Good afternoon. My name is Eddie Jordan and I represent Mr. Williams. My Louisiana bar number is 01450.
Sir, and generally, counsel will close out at the end for us.
Okay,
So, Mr. Williams.
Yes, ma'am.
We're gonna get my list.
and by the way,
See,
we have one witness as well.
Sir, St. Andrews.
That's correct.
Jonathan St. Andrews, yes. I was just fixing to acknowledge his presence, and we'll call on him at the appropriate time. And that is Mr. Williams' son.
That's correct.
So, Mr. Williams, you're here this afternoon. You're seeking a commutation of your sentence. You were
Yes, ma'am.
sentenced in the 16th Judicial District, Iberia Parish, in March of 2009. You received a life sentence for a second-degree murder. Is that information correct?
That is correct, ma'am.
All right, Mr. Williams, your case this afternoon has been assigned to Mrs. Jackson. Would you answer her questions?
Good afternoon, Mr. Williams. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, ma'am. And I'm a little nervous, but I'm all right.
It's understandable. That's understandable. So we'll just get to some small things. How old are you?
I'm 71 years old, ma'am.
And how long have you been incarcerated on this charge?
18 years, ma'am.
And tell us a little bit about yourself back 18 years ago. What kind of work were you doing? What was your background?
Yes, ma'am. I had recently retired as a teacher in the Cattle Parish school system. At the time, I was not employed. My wife and I were just basically enjoying life. I'd like to say first that one of my primary reasons for being here is to identify the fact and declare that I am responsible for my wife's life on February 20th, 2006.
Tell us what you did to cause her death.
She died because of manual strangulation, ma'am. Excuse me.
Because you know your story has kind of shifted several times. You know, your story has sort of shifted several times. You know, from what you initially told the police to what you put in your application to what you put in your statement when they did the pre-parole the pre-clemency investigation. It's kind of changed. You know, when I read your clemency application, one of the things that struck me is that basically you just stated some details about her injuries, but you never indicated how she got those injuries. You never indicated what you did. At one point, you said that she had been vomiting all day and you was trying to get out of the bed and you just tried to throw her back in the bed and she hit her hit on the side of the bed and that's how she got injured. And now you're acknowledging that you strangled her to death. So why so many different stories?
Ma'am, basically, what happened, I've narrowed this thing down to 4 sequence of things that happened. We began by having a nice evening, just talking, having fun. Then Secondly, basically, we had an argument that was prompted by me. I shouldn't have not said anything to her. Then she got ill. She began to vomit very bad. A couple hours after that was followed by myself. And throughout that process, I tried to assist her, taking her back and forth to the restroom. She did not want to, and I did not want to go to the hospital. Later on, we were visited by my mom. They refused, they didn't want to let me go and wake her up. And she, like I said, she had several falls back in, she fell probably 4 to 6 times. The last 3 times were very, very hard. The last time I picked her up, I laid on the bed. She laid on the bed after my mom and them left. I laid with her and I was still throwing up. Later on that evening, the last thing I did, I got up and I asked, I said, Sin, how about let's get up and go try and take a walk? Maybe we'll feel better. She did not respond. And I asked again, she did not respond. And then I was still sick. And so the next thing I knew, I was being read, I think it was the next morning, by the police officer told me that I was being charged with my wife's murder. The last thing I spoke to my wife, I didn't know she was injured or anything.
Oh, Ms. Williams, you just got telling me she died from manual strangulation. That means somebody put their hands or something around her neck and compressed her neck until she died.
I was using, yes, I did use my hand to help her. Yes, ma'am.
And if that's what you want to tell us today, I'll let you tell us that. Now, you had a drinking problem, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
In fact, you were convicted 3 times of driving while intoxicated. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, ma'am.
And you also have a history of domestic violence.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct? On January 15th of 2002, you pled guilty to 3 counts of simple battery. And that did not involve, it involved a woman, but it did not involve your wife. Remember that? You pled guilty to 3 counts of simple battery. You got probation. You were told that you couldn't go back to bars. You couldn't drink alcohol. You had to complete anger management, and you were not to have contact with the victim. Remember that?
Yes, ma'am. I don't remember the events, in sequence. I will admit that I've always suffered. I didn't admit before, but I do admit that I've always suffered from an anger problem. And
who was the victim in the case where you had the 3 counts of simple battery? Why you gotta look at the paper? You don't know who you.
I just don't remember exactly what time. There were so many events that I acted rationally.
I'm talking. How many different women have you been convicted of domestic battery?
Well, I had problems in my first marriage. My second wife.
What was her name?
My first marriage.
Hmm?
Oh, you asked about my first marriage, ma'am?
What's her name?
Desi Williams.
Okay. And did you have some domestic violence charges involving Ms. Williams?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay, and was the victim who was murdered, was she your second wife?
Yes, ma'am. Right, Cynthia.
Okay, now, listen at me. In March of 2004, you had an aggravated assault conviction and you were ordered to complete domestic violence program. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you complete the domestic violence program?
Yes, ma'am.
But then in March 14th of 2005, You got a second-degree battery, which was a felony. You pled guilty to it. You were ordered to have no contact with the victim. That was on March 14th, 2005. You remember that?
Yes, ma'am, that involved my wife. Yes,
Mhm. And then on December 16th, 2005, you were arrested for domestic abuse battery. And again, you were ordered to have no contact with the victim. Is that correct?
yes, ma'am.
And then 2 months later, you were arrested for your wife's murder on February 20th of 06. You had an arrest in December of 05, and then in February of 06 is when you were arrested for your wife's murder. Is that
Yes, ma'am,
correct?
yes, ma'am, that's correct.
And according to the autopsy, she was strangled to death. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, ma'am, right.
Now, I do see Mr. Williams, in the 17 years you've been, almost 18 years you've been incarcerated, you haven't had any write-ups, which is a good thing. You are a Men-B trustee. I see that you've taken Living in Balance, substance abuse. I'm not seeing a whole lot of programs, but you have Thinking for a Change and AA. So tell me what you've learned from your substance abuse classes about your drinking.
Yes, ma'am. Number one, at first I knew I had a problem, but I refused to admit it. But now I do. I was in denial, and I'm no longer in denial. I am in recovery, and I have not had a drink since February the 20th, 2006. I was abstained from alcohol use and the use of any mood altering substances, ma'am.
Have you been incarcerated since February 20th of 2006?
Yes, ma'am, I have.
Well, I know that there is some availability of alcohol, but it's not as if you've been on the street and free to go to bars and liquor stores. So are you an alcoholic?
Yes, ma'am, I am a recovering alcoholic. Yes, I am. Yes, ma'am.
And tell me some of the other programs that you've taken that you think have helped you in some way.
I've taken anger management, and it along with the job that I have has helped me to recognize and admit that I did and I do have an anger problem.
What job do you have?
My job falls in the title of orderly, but I have worked from 2009 until now in the Interfaith Chapel as a musician. I work with the Catholic ministers as a Catholic peer minister. As a music teacher.
How has that helped you with your anger management?
Because, well, basically I work in church all day. I've had to unofficially and sort of exercise my talents in terms of being able to control the way I respond to people that's suffering the same way I am. I'm not as aggressive as I used to in responding to problems and troubles when they come my way. And then I have guys that for some reason they come to me for advice. So I have to try to listen to them, which I wouldn't do. I wasn't too quick to do before all of this happened. Now I'm willing to listen and try to not be so aggressive dealing with people in a negative way. because I feel that I have an obligation to provide as much support as I can and be as humble and as helpful as I can in a positive way. And my thinking is not the way I used to. Everything had to be my way. And I've learned that I've had to humble myself and learn to listen to a lot of people before I just act on emotions like I used to.
All right, well, thank you very much. Ward, what can you tell us about Mr. Williams?
Nothing else. He's low risk. He has 0 disciplinary reports since he's been here. He participates in a few programs.
All right, thank you, Ms. Unaka. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Russian?
Good afternoon, Mr. Williams. How are you? Mr. Williams?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, I'm sorry.
Al from Rosia, how are you doing this afternoon?
Oh, I'm still a little nervous, sir, but thank you. I'm glad I'm here before you.
I'm going to read some information, and along the way, I'm going to ask you whether it's true or not true, okay?
Yes, sir.
On November 16, 2005, you were arrested for domestic abuse battery on Cynthia Williams. And you were incarcerated until February 13, 2006, when you had a revocation hearing. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And in that revocation hearing on February 13, 2006, the judge decided not to revoke you. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And he ordered you and made new conditions on your supervision that you live with your mother, Miss Pearl Williams. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Right. Pearl Williams, right.
And you are to live at that address, and you are to remain drug-free, alcohol-free, and submit to drug screening. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you are to have no contact with Miss Cynthia Williams. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And he said you can be released today to your mother. Exactly.
Yes,
Is that
sir.
right?
Yes, sir.
And 7 days later, your wife was dead.
Yes, sir.
And you were ordered by the judge to have no contact, and you went immediately to live with your wife. Did you say you had spent the last 2 or 3 days alone, and you were using drugs, and you were using alcohol? Is that correct?
I was using alcohol, sir.
Okay, you was using alcohol.
Yes,
In
sir.
direct violation of the judge's order.
Yes, sir.
If that judge were to revoke you, your wife may be still living.
Yes, sir.
Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Roche. All right, I don't see any other questions, so now we'd like to hear from Mr. St. Andrews. You can keep your seat, sir. We can see you. It's fine.
Okay.
You can go ahead and speak. They can see you.
Okay.
Yeah, I can.
I just wanted to state that, overall, my father, Mr. Williams, there, he actually is an overall, good person, with regards to what mistakes that he may have made, over time, and for myself and many others, he's kind of been he's really been a really great influence, almost like a superhero to us all. Because of his influence, I also became an educator, just like my sister is doing the same thing. So, and they'll, and as a return, hopefully, to society, he would definitely have all the support of his family, you know, and friends.
Yes, sir. And thank you, Mr. St. Andrews. Mr. Williams, before we turn it over to Mr. Jordan, is there a statement you'd like to make?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon again. I would like to thank the Pardon and Parole Board for allowing me to appear before them this afternoon. Thanks to Warden Cooper and any other administrative personnel in our presence. My attorney, Eddie Jordan Jr., my son, Jonathan, for appearing before you this afternoon. This here is not totally about me, but about the victims who have been impacted by this horrible crime and the death of my wife, Cynthia Williams. I want everyone here to know that I accept the full responsibility for the death of my wife, Cynthia. To my brother-in-law, Kenny McDonald Jr., and to Cynthia's family, my two children, Anthony and Antoinette, who were born to me and my wife, and to my mother, Pearl Williams, who is 98 years old, and who's prayed with me ever since this tragedy occurred. And lastly, to my family members, friends, and my community, I want to apologize and ask for your forgiveness. I would like to acknowledge members of the Louisiana Pardon and Parole Board, law enforcement, and healthcare professionals who were impacted as a result of my actions. I also ask for your forgiveness. I take full responsibility for the death of my wife, Cynthia, and I'm extremely sorry, remorseful, and grief-stricken because of her death. It has been extremely painful for me to think about the level of trauma, grief, suffering, and pain my victims have experienced and endured. I not only feel sympathetic toward their suffering, but I am also empathetic. However, I will never be able to understand the level of suffering and pain they have endured. To Anthony, Antoinette, Jonathan, and Joy, the loss of a mother to the family is a tragedy and tremendous loss. Once again, I ask for your forgiveness. I would like to mention to the board that I have learned the true meaning of the word mercy. Mercy is love that expresses when someone experiences suffering, poverty, brokenness, and or sin. I am a broken man. Today, I appear before this board and ask you for mercy in making your decision and another opportunity to return to society. I declare today that I will be the man that God intended me to be. Respectfully, Lester J. Williams. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right, Mr. Jordan.
I too want to thank the board for giving us an opportunity to appear before you and to consider Mr. Williams' request for a commutation of his sentence. I don't think that the board fully understands that Mr. Williams is a person who started out many years ago before this incident as a man with education. He had a bachelor's degree and also a master's degree in music. It sounds to me, based upon what I've been able to glean from the file here, that Mr. Williams' family was actually a very loving family. They were married for some 26 years or so before this terrible incident. And it was a loving relationship in that there were 2 children born of that relationship. And as I understand, Miss Williams also had substantial education. So here were 2 people, a mother and a father, a husband and wife, who both were doing well financially and educationally, and yet we have a terrible tragedy, and I think much of this can be attributed to Mr. Williams' alcoholism. And I submit to you that that is the reason why his understanding of what happened it involves gaps and incoherent type of a response to exactly what happened. Alcoholics do not fully recall things that happen, and they are subject to blackouts. And to Mr. Williams' credit, he's addressed that. He was in denial for quite some time, and it apparently, the alcoholism not only affected his conduct and relationship to the death of his wife, the killing of his wife, but it also affected his relationships that took place before this incident. And I would suggest to the board that that is the real problem that Mr. Williams faced. He was a productive individual. He was working, he was employed, he had education, he had a wife who had education. My understanding is that she had a background in psychology. And she was very productive. They were working at the same school. Mr. Williams was a band director. He was a leader at that school. He was responsible for shaping the lives of young people. And all indications are that he was doing a very good job in that area. But alcoholism took over his life, and it caused him to not comply with the court's order. And it's true that if he had not been an alcoholic, I do not think that he would have done the things that he did. And he would have complied with the judge's order to stay away during that time period. I would suggest to the board that that's the case. So he violated the court order, and as a result, his wife lost her life as a result of what he did to her. He's now taken responsibility for that, complete responsibility. That impact statement is just a clear, strong statement that he alone is responsible. No one else is responsible. Control of his life by taking the courses on alcoholism, on substance abuse. And he's admitted that he's an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic. And I think that would do him well if when he returns to society, that he knows that he cannot ever touch alcohol again, and that alcohol is something that would cause him to lose control of his life again. So he successfully completed that program. And it's not a surprise really that he has not had an incident or a write-up during his entire 18-year period. 18 years, is that it? Here at Angola. He hasn't been subjected to alcohol or any other kind of substance. And yes, unfortunately, sometimes people do, even here, get in, they sometimes become involved with substance abuse. And yet, Mr. Williams has not. And that is an indication of his commitment to being a different kind of person, a new person. And I submit to the board that he would not get involved in crime again. He would never commit any kind of crime, particularly this kind of offense, but no kind of crime. And all the indicators here are that he is a strong candidate for clemency because of his age in part. A person who is older is not a high risk for recidivism. He's 71 years old, and he has significant health problems. The fact of the matter is that his health problems make his lifespan shorter, and so he would not be expected to live another 20 or 30 years, or even a shorter time period than that. All of that indicates to me that he's going to live the rest of his life in a way that would be in keeping with the rules of society and the laws that we have here, and that he would be a productive asset to his community. He has a family that's supportive. The board knows that he would go back and live with his mother. Is that correct? With the son, I'm sorry. And he also is in a position to earn a living. He has a certificate in pesticides and also another certificate in ministry. And these are courses and programs that he's taken since he's been at the prison. So he is not going to be a burden on society. He's going to be productive. He's going to be positive. He's going to earn a living. He is not going to get involved in any kind of activity that would make the board feel bad about their decision. He's not engaged in any kind of substance abuse. And you would say, well, a person would always say that they're not engaged, but he's got 18 years of proof that he's not going to get involved in substance abuse again. And again, I go back to the fact that alcoholism is his primary problem, and it really made him lose control of his destiny, of his life. And he is not that person today. And I ask the board to consider giving him mercy, to show him mercy, and give him an opportunity to come back to society by commuting his sentence.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I do believe the board is prepared to vote. Mrs. Johnson.
I'd like to ask you.
We have a motion for executive session. Is there a second?
Yes, I'll say.
Mr. Marabella, is there any objection? All right, so we have a unanimous vote for executive session. Stand by. We'll be back shortly after discussing confidential matters. All right, Mr. Williams, we are back in regular session and we are prepared to vote. Mrs. Jackson will be voting first.
All right, Mr. Williams, this is really, really unfortunate case. you're 71 years old. But you've only served about a little over 18 years on this sentence. And as I look at your history of domestic abuse, your history of driving while intoxicated, when I look at all of the places along the way where the court system tried to intervene to put you on a different path, and yet, in spite of all the times you appeared before court for either driving while intoxicated or domestic abuse battery, none of it seemed to deter your behavior. And so as I look at the case as a whole, because of your history of domestic violence, because of your demonstrated record of disregarding court orders and the insufficient amount of time served on this charge, our vote today is.
Thank you, Mr. Roche.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Williams, based on a long history of domestic abuse, law enforcement opposition from the victim's family, and 17 years and 4 months for premeditated murder is insufficient time served. Therefore, I'm going to deny your request.
Mr. Marabella
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My vote is the same for the same reasons as my colleagues.
and Mr. Freeman.
I agree.
And Mr. Williams, I do agree with my colleagues. I think your attorney made some good arguments and did a good job for you, but you know, you have an extensive history of domestic violence. My vote today also is to deny. So today, sir, your application for clemency has been denied.